Musa, namo Bamako ka bonwa, awo, du belebeledo, Abidjando, du gubado fana. Salam alaikum, audanse, ntogoko kolman, noye adama jaloye. Welcome to another episode of Basic Bambara, a project from Ankata, my initiative to create media and resources for speaking and learning Manding. Are you new here? Think about subscribing. Earlier in this series, we learned how to use so-called qualitative verbs. These let us say things like, the house is tall, or the town is large. But what happens if we wanted to say things like, the tall house, or the large town? In that case, we'd need to use adjectives. Specifically in this episode, I'll cover 5 things. First, we'll cover pure adjectives. Second, we'll cover adjectives that are derived from qualitative verbs. Third, we'll cover adjective-like compounding. Fourth, we'll cover some irregularities that come up. And fifth, we will cover the diminutive and the augmentative suffixes ni and ba. Are you feeling like you're going to need a little bit extra practice to get everything down that's in this video? There's a link in the description below that can give you access to a text, audio flashcards, and a quiz for every video in this series. Otherwise, Ankata! In Bambara and Manding in general, there are certain words that are primarily adjectives. When you use an adjective, you can place it directly after the noun that it modifies. So let's take a word like kura, meaning new. If we want to use that in a phrase, then we could say something like fang kura, meaning literally thing new, or in English, new thing. Fang kura. So whenever we have a noun phrase with an adjective, it's going to be in that order. We're going to have the noun and then the adjective. Let's take another example and see how we can insert it into a sentence. So if we take an example like jakuma fitini, meaning cat small, or in English, small cat, let's put it into a presentative sentence. Jakuma fitini do, meaning it's a small cat, or literally, cat, small, it is. Jakuma fitini do. What's important to remember is that these adjectives cannot be used in the same way that a qualitative verb gets used. So remember the structure subject, ka, man, plus qualitative verb. Let's take an example so you can remember. If we had the same expression of jakuma, meaning cat, let's say the cat is good. Jakuma kain, meaning cat, and then ka, allowing us to use a qualitative verb, and then ni, meaning good. Jakuma kain. But we could not put that into a sentence with fitini, meaning small. We cannot say jakuma ka fitini. That does not work as a sentence because it's an adjective, not a qualitative verb. There are a number of words that are pure adjectives. I can't list them all here, but let's look at a few examples from Na Baroke.
Ali demsen fitini
Femelo, fem fitin tekwa.
Bu waru kolon waflo bo fali wakil bo wakil ndima.
do be ne nuga wari sisa iba to ga wari war kurai
ne be fega ga yoro do mo ko sebedo de.
Some words act as adjectives, but they're actually derived, that is, they come from qualitative verbs. They become adjectives via the suffix man. Let's have a look at an example so you can see how this change happens. Imagine that you were in a town where it rained a ton the night before. You come out in the morning and you see there's water everywhere. You could use the qualitative verb cha, which means numerous or abundant. You might look at all the water and say, jika cha, meaning literally, water is abundant, as in, there's a lot of water, jika cha. But if you wanted to use cha as an adjective, you would need to add man onto it and form a single noun phrase. So for instance, to say abundant water, you would now say ji chama, meaning water, abundant. Ji chama. Note that you can't use this word cha without making this derivation in this way. You cannot say ji cha to mean abundant water or a lot of water. You have to say ji chama. In some cases, you might notice a slight change of the pronunciation of the original qualitative verb when it's derived into an adjective. For instance, if we take the word ni, meaning good, if we make it into an adjective, we would expect it to be nimang. But typically in spoken Bambara, in Mali at least, you'll hear people say nyumang, as in mabili nyumang, meaning good car. Mabili nyumang. Or if we take the qualitative verb di, meaning pleasant or pleasing, you would expect it to be dimang. This does happen in some varieties, but typically in spoken Bambara, you'll hear people say dumang, as in dumini dumang, meaning tasty or pleasing food. Dumini dumang.
Dongan trawe baro caman ke.
Nafa caman baara.
Mbe do sokono ka birifani grimanta.
Ini sabarla ibe ko nyuman soro.
Parce que ko nyuman tɛ.
Parce que bobo kono mɔgɔ caman bɛ dula kan mɛn.
Many qualitative verbs, though, can, as if they were adjectives, actually appear directly after a noun. For instance, let's take a qualitative verb like gelling, meaning difficult. If we wanted to use it in a qualitative verb sentence like those we've already learned, we could say something like this. Baraka gelling, meaning work is difficult. Baraka gelling. Conveniently, we can also use gelling as if it were an adjective that is directly next to the noun that it modifies without needing to make any changes to it. For instance, bara gelling, meaning hard work. Bara gelling. Note how I wrote bara and gelling as if they were two separate words. This is actually a little bit misleading, even if it's typical in Latin-based Bambara. Instead of thinking of a noun and a separate adjective or qualitative verb, we could instead think of it as a brand new compound word that combines the noun and the qualitative verb. So, bara gelling, meaning hard work. But if we put the dash in there, it signals to us that this is actually like one entity. Bara gelling. From this perspective, Bambara is a little bit like English, since we also do a lot of compounding, but we tend to write it inconsistently. For instance, fire truck, which we normally write as one word, but then we also have light switch, which we write as two words. In any case, without going into the details or nuances in this video, what's important to know is that lots of English language concepts, expressions that combine a noun and an adjective, like black car, can be expressed in one of two ways. For instance, mabelifin, which is often written as two words, mabelifin, but in fact is an instance of the compounding that we've been discussing. So car, black, mabelifin. Or mabelifiman, meaning car, black, but this time fiman, one word, which is derived into an adjective form. So car, black, mabelifiman. In some cases, the adjectival form that corresponds with a particular qualitative verb may be irregular. I won't cover all of the irregular forms that can come up, but here's one of them to show you what I mean. For instance, if we want to say the equivalent of tall man, we could do so in one of two ways. First, we could use the compounding option that we just discussed. In that case, we would say jejang, meaning man, tall, sometimes written as two separate words, but really we can think of it as one compound, and so I'll mark it with the dash, jejang. Or we could do things with the adjectival pair that corresponds with the qualitative verb jang. We would expect this to be jangmang, jamang, but in fact it has an irregular form, jamajang. So we then have che jamajang, meaning man, tall. Che jamajang. In addition to all of these kinds of adjectival options that we've covered so far, there are two other words that are also kind of adjective-like. They are the diminutive and the augmentative suffixes ni and ba. The diminutive suffix ni attaches to the noun that it modifies, and it essentially makes it into a small or a wee version of the thing that you are discussing. For instance, we could say den, meaning child, but we could also say deni, meaning little child. Deni. The augmentative suffix ba does the same thing, but in the other direction. It adds a value of large or big to whatever thing you're talking about. For instance, we could have the word dugu, meaning town, or we could have the word duguba, meaning big town. Duguba.
A foli ka ɲi foli ye mɔgɔ sɛbɛba de ye.
N tɛ se ka ko ba kɔni fɔ an ɲɛna.
Cɛkɔrɔba yɛrɛ tɛ jɛn n'a ye.
An musokɔrɔba ni kunkolo ti baara kɛ tugun.
Ko duruni.
Unité tɛ bon wari deni min bɛ ele fɛ i bɛ se ka taa k'i bɛ taa don.
At this point, you may be asking yourself, how do I know when to use what form? The short answer is that it's up to you. As you learn Bambara and Manding in general, you'll notice regional tendencies to use one form more than another, but in general, all of the forms that I've laid out here are recognized and understood by everyone. What's important for you is to learn the qualitative verbs and their adjectival equivalents, whether they are used regularly, using mang, irregularly, for example, jamajang, or in compound words. From there, you'll be able to recognize and move between them just like native speakers would do in an exchange like the one that I showed at the very beginning of this video. Aywa, did you like this video? Do you wish there were more resources for speaking and learning African languages like Manding on the internet? Me too. Think about becoming a patron or throwing me a tip. There's a link down the description below and up here, I think. Aywa, ni diara ye kambe ala kandeme.